Welcome back to another episode of Shifting Schools. We just got off a great call with Jody, all the way from Germany, staying up late to meet up with us in our time sinks here across the world. So it was great to meet up with her, an international educator. We're going to get to that interview in just a minute, talking about PE and specifically early childhood PE. But I think there's something in here for all of us. But of course, I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Trisha. How are you doing today, Trisha?
I'm doing well, Jeff. I couldn't agree with you more. It's really interesting. Jody is, of course, an early years PE teacher, but so much of what she said, we kept connecting to it in terms of thinking about adult learners and
Mm.
their needs as well. So, again, if you don't know, Jody Matey is an experienced international educator, leader, and innovator advocating for inclusive, meaningful movement in early childhood education. We will talk specifically about an amazing post that she authored for the Phys Equity blog. Listeners, please know that link will be over there in the show notes. Jeff, what do you think listeners should be paying attention, watching out for in today's conversation?
Yeah, I think the big overarching kind of shifted thought for me, as we kind of reflect on this after the fact, was this idea of just continuing asking ourselves, what do students need? What are and you'll hear Jody talk about this a lot, like what are the underlying things that are leading to the behavior? And she really digs into that of, when a kid has a behavior, your first thought isn't why are they acting out? It's what's causing them to act out. And I think she does a really great job of just talking through and thinking about that as an educator, and just constantly asking ourselves that question: what do kids need? Where are kids at? Where are they coming from? Where are they going to? What might they need in this moment? And I know that's a question that educators are constantly asking themselves, anyways. But I think today's episode is a real good, just moment to sit back, reflect on where are we doing this and how are we doing this in different ways. Let's talk about maybe three things that listeners should be listening for in today's episode. Trisha, do you want to get us started? What's something that you think really kind of stood out that we want listeners to kind of be honed in on?
Jody reminds me of something that I've heard so many friends who work in early childhood education mention, and that's just how collaborative their approach is, how they really do make sure that they're checking in with each other, they're having a lot of conversations about students. And so I think that's really something to listen out for and to reconsider, in what ways are we as a team collaborating if we're noticing that a student is struggling, how are we taking a collective approach to that and being responsive as a unit of teachers and not just saying, okay, I'm just going to, make my own way forward and trying to support the student, but really tapping into the insight that that child's other teachers may have as well. What about you, Jeff? What's something that
Yeah,
you
I
want to highlight?
think I think the thing that we continue to come back to it through this episode is that we all need movement. No matter your age, movement is so important. Whether you're an educator, on your feet all day, if you're a student who happens to be sitting for 6 hours in 6 different periods throughout your school day, movement is key, and understanding what you need in that moment as well. This self advocacy piece that we constantly are talking about here at Shifting Schools, I think comes through in today's episode. So be listening for some of that in here today too, of just how do we support each other in knowing or in understanding what we need in that moment as well. And what about the third thing? I think both of us kind of talked about this idea of how do we just involve parents and caretakers in movement.
Yeah, and Jody will make a really great case for why when we are trying out strategies in the classroom, we need to inform parents and caretakers because Jeff, I know you and I have experienced this as educators when you do take that team approach and when that child has had so many opportunities to try the strategy out both at home and in the classroom, they sort of get into that practice of like this is the thing I know that I need to do, right? And that's what we want. We want to be empowering students to, okay, this is a strategy that will work in this moment. And it almost becomes like muscle memory for them.
Mm,
And I really think that's only possible if different environment, I'm trying it out again. Because the reality is, these strategies are not just for school, right? We want
yeah.
children to, if they need to regulate, they need to dip into a self regulation strategy when they are 5 years older and they're in a different environment, this is something they've tested, they've tried, and they remember.
Yeah. I just think, this is just again a great episode for to be reflective about how am I including movement in my classroom regardless of what age I teach or what subject I teach. And so I'm excited to get this one out and into your ears as just a great reflective piece. But before we hear from Jody today, a quick word from today's show sponsors. Just a quick reminder before we get to today's episode that you can save $50 at the upcoming NCCE conference here in the state of Washington, March 21st through 23rd, by using the code SHIFTINGSCHOOLS50. It's always a great conference, and I'll be there doing 6 sessions, including 2 on ChatGPT and AI in education. We will also be recording a live Shifting Schools podcast with anyone who wants to join us. We will be in room 406 at 2 p.m. on March 23rd. That's right at the end of the conference. Thank you to NCCE for sponsoring Shifting Schools and giving us a space to record a live episode. If you're going to the conference, please make sure you stop by and say hi. And if you can join me at 2 p.m. in room 406, we'll be part of the podcast and we'd love to have you. We'll be talking about trends during the conference, aha moments, and just our takeaways and what's happening in education today. If you can't make it to the conference, make sure you follow using the hashtag NCCE23 on Twitter and be listening for that episode after the conference. Again, that's ncce.org, and that offer code is SHIFTINGSCHOOLS50. Of course, it's all in the show notes as well. And just a quick reminder that all our podcast listeners can save $25 when they use the code SSPOD25 at checkout on any of our courses. Our 5-day AI challenge and Trisha's stellar The Intersection of AI and Equity are both for sale at the moment. With the discount code, you get either one for $74. We send you an email with a link to the slide deck that includes everything you need to implement it in your school. A built-in reflective journal, a facilitator's guide, and videos walking you through the process. In fact, I just took our 5-day challenge and used it in a PD training at a school district. So many great ways to use these resources. Don't forget that $74 for a site license. You are allowed and encouraged to give every teacher in your building their own copy. You don't have to go to a website, there's no logging in. We literally just give you the file to share within your school. It comes in both Google Slides and PowerPoint format, and of course, we're here to support you every step of the way. So use that code SSPOD25 and start supporting the shift in your school around generative AI. That's SSPOD25 at shiftingschools.com. All right, with that, here is Jody, an international educator, talking about self-regulation and understanding our sensory systems through education and specifically as a physical education teacher. With that, I'm so excited to share this with you on with the show. All right, welcome back to another episode of Shifting Schools. I'm excited to be here with my co-host Trisha and our guest today, Jody, all the way from Germany. It's great to have her here today. We're going to be talking about some of the work that she's doing around the PE classroom. So, Jody, welcome to the podcast. Trisha, welcome as well. It's always great to see you. I always say it's kind of funny because you and I literally been on calls all morning together, and then we have to pretend like this is the first time we see each other on the podcast. So a little behind the scenes there of how this actually works, but it's great.
I'm still excited, Jeff. I'm still excited to see you again.
Here, right? And it's great to be here with Jody. Jody, you've taught in a lot of different places. You've taught in the US, in China, the UK, and you're currently living in Germany. Can you talk a bit about how your thoughts on what makes for an inclusive PE classroom has shifted, in part due to the work you've done across cultures, continents, and being parts of different teams?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a great question. Very comprehensive. So, yeah, I've been in many different places and many different teams. And actually, I didn't yet study change theory until this year, which was fascinating, embracing new cultures and new experiences. And I think something that is stands true and wherever you are is that parents want the best for their kids, and they have the best of intentions in terms of providing the right environment and providing the right yeah, for everything. And as an educator, I think I've always sought to do that, no matter where I am. And in certain schools, obviously, the demands can be quite high in terms of much more in the older students. But for me, it's really about creating an environment for the kids where they feel psychologically safe, they feel
Mm,
like they belong, they feel like their feelings are validated. And especially in PE, where some children might not feel successful physically, they can still feel like they can come to my room and feel successful being, you know, across all different ways as a leader, contributor, and they can shine and still find joy in movement. So that's been something that I've really tried to harness no matter what environment I've been in.
And, I think your point about psychological safety, it dawns on me that the PE classroom is perhaps one of those subject areas that maybe it matters more than others. I'm thinking about just the way what you are like quote unquote working on is visible in ways that in other subject areas it might not be.
Mhm.
And Sherry Spellick, who is also a PE educator in Germany, I'm sure she's got a phenomenal newsletter called Bending the Arc, and she talks a lot about how the PE classroom is maybe the most interesting classroom to think more about
Mhm.
equity. And
Mhm.
we invited you on in part because of a guest post that you authored for the Phys Equity blog that's entitled Self Regulation and Understanding Our Sensory Systems: An Inclusive Approach to Early Years PE. Listeners, it's an outstanding read. Please have a look at it. The link to it will be in our show notes. Jody, in that post, you talk about schools being, quote, sensory rich and how that can be a challenge for young learners. And of course, what's great is you address how we can meet that challenge. Can you talk to us about how that understanding has really shifted your practice, what having that awareness might mean in your PE classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my practice has shifted a lot over the years. I'm certainly not the educator I was coming, from the U.S. and then after Germany, after China, um, and everywhere else I've taught. I think my practice has really shifted in thinking about what I feel is most important for my kids and my students. And the first of all, for me, if a child comes into my gym and they do exactly what I want them to do and then they leave, yes, on the surface it looks like that is all well and good, but for me, I really it's really important to me that a child comes in and they feel not necessarily successful, but they feel validated. They feel, oh, okay, I'm allowed to feel upset. I'm allowed to feel a little bit dysregulated. I'm allowed to feel tired. And sort of honoring that gives kids, I think, the freedom to then, again, I can build that relationship so they do feel connected to me. Schools, yes, are very sensory rich. Coming out of COVID, where kids were at home with their families in very quiet, insular spaces, and then, on screens. So obviously, very sterile environment. Again,
mm,
don't even get me started on a whole tangent of how play has shifted, and kids aren't just digging in mud and and climbing trees, which obviously has a whole impact in terms of physical development. But thinking about, of course, then kids were back in school, and immediately many educators noticed kids they're standing too close to each other. They can't handle all the noise, the sounds, the smells, the cafeteria. It's it is quite overwhelming for young children, and if their systems are sensitive to any of that sensory input, then their brain will be in a stressed state. And of course, when your brain is in a stressed state, it can't learn. That flight or flight response. And I think my journey as an educator, I know now what I need to be. And I often do, when I present to this workshop to parents, I often kind of take them on that journey of, what do you need to be regulated? What do you need
Mm,
to focus? Because I think we often are thinking, as a parent myself, I'm like asking my son, what do you need? What do you need? And I think, actually, I need to model. Actually, it's really hard for me to sit for a long time. I need to move. My brain needs to move my body needs to move before my brain can function. I'm quite sensitive to smells, and certain, I hate, there's certain things that I have experienced on this journey, which now I hopefully can bring into the classroom and the gym, so kids can feel that they can be their best selves. And that doesn't mean, they need to show me their best selves, but they can feel honored and appreciated in that way.
It's so important. And, I realize and recognize some folks will be listening to this conversation perhaps like while they're driving. So they can't pause and open up your article. And I know I can almost feel it that folks will be wondering like, okay, what Jody's talking about sounds great. And, not even just for young learners, but for us as adults, right? We also get dysregulated. Like I also find, post COVID, spending lots of time just at home, you're right. Like being in physical spaces with others initially felt like jarring, overwhelming. The first time I went to a restaurant, it was like, whoa, overload. So, can
Mm-hmm.
you just give us an example of a technique that you often might recommend, either to parents and caretakers, to help young learners self-regulate that might also be helpful for us? I'm thinking, Jeff, you and I were talking in trainings a year ago. Edutopia had this great YouTube series. You can Google it. It still exists. 60-second resets with some things that, again, we can do. One of the ones they suggested was like 60 seconds, set a timer and push a wall. Just lean against a wall, make sure it's a fortified wall. It's a solid wall.
yeah.
And it really is, like, I find even for myself, it's a great recess strategy. So do you have one that you find is kind of your go-to that you recommend very often?
Oh, it's so hard to pick one. But I think it's such an important thing that you mentioned that, because what that is heavy work. And heavy work has a really soothing, calming response to our nervous system. So you think about all this whole, I'm sure you might have one yourself, but heavy blankets are like, heavy weighted blankets are
Mm,
like the thing now. So many adults are like, I love my weighted blanket. It's the greatest thing. And so for me, anytime I see a behavior or I see anything, I'm always like, why? Why is that? So what do we need that for? Or, any child, anytime they're, showing a behavior, what is the underlying cause of that? If kids are covering their ears during a fire alarm, it's like, what's happening actually? What is their auditory system sensitive to noise? So let's explore that a little bit more. Let's unpack that. Let's see if it manifests in different areas. So I think the number one thing, what I really encourage families to do is have kids have a quiet space, even like a little tent, or a space they can retreat to. That, for some households with multiple kids or dogs and all kinds of busyness, they have a space where they can kind of retreat and calm themselves, either with headphones. You have kind of a soothing, you can have a visual, like kind of those lava lamps. They have all kinds of sensory tools now that can be calming. Some kids, I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm clicking my pen because I think, I'm like, okay, it's like a fidget, right? Like, remember the fidget spinners? Everybody went crazy for
yeah.
the fidget spinners. But it's quite normal, because kids gravitate to things they need. They naturally seek out the things they need. And as educators, we want to kind of open that up and help them with them in a way that's appropriate, socially appropriate. But to really answer your question, I would say first and foremost would be creating that space where kids can just have it and shut it down and kind of block out noise or sound or vision or whatever it is. And they can articulate when they feel like they need it, because that's a really
Mm.
Mm,
important part of the journey too. It's not just, oh wow, I noticed your body's fidgety, you need a movement break. We start that as educators, but what I really want to see is a child start to take ownership of, oh yeah, I'm really noticing this, because then they're going to start to understand their learning needs. And that's a whole different subject around like neurodiversity and understanding what they need to be successful. But that's part of the journey into adulthood. What do we need individually to be successful?
well, and I love that, because I think that's also right, that our job as teachers is to start helping you understand, what do you need. That self advocacy piece that Trisha, you talk about all the time. We just got done doing a webinar where we were talking about students being self advocates for what they need in feedback, right? I'm wondering too, also, Jody, being a PE teacher, we have seen this idea of physical education really transform. I mean, from the time I was in elementary school to what physical education looks like today, I feel like is such a transformation into how we want students moving, how we want students understanding their body, how we want students understanding their noises and surroundings around them.
Mhm.
Can you maybe just talk about this constant transition that I think we're really seeing in physical ed, and where do you think this is headed? What do you think we need to be thinking about of educators of all subject areas, all grade levels, around this idea of our physical spaces and physical education?
Oh wow, I could go a lot of different directions with this question, but I think one thing that always stands out to me too, just as an adult, is anytime I walk into a meeting space, faculty meeting, it's always those same tables, those same chairs. It's kind of like, okay, I know I need to be standing in the back. I know I need to be sitting in like maybe a wobble stool, mobile seating. A lot of classrooms have flexible seating, adaptations for kids who have whatever they need. But it's just so funny as adults, you walk in, you're like, well, yeah, this is exactly the same. It's like carbon copy from, all of a sudden people forget that as an adult, I actually might like, beanbag to sit on, or maybe I want to
Yeah.
have a wobbly stool. I really think the beauty of the work now that again, in the early years, it's so collaborative. And for
Mm,
me as an educator, as a PE educator, I really want to bring movement to the forefront of looking at kids through what is the physicality of early childhood learning. We just did a presentation yesterday for our parent community with the PYP coordinator, and it was I love this presentation because she talks to how it looks in the classroom, I talk to how it looks in PE, and then we talk
mm,
about how those natural collaborations, how those natural connections happen. So I'm looking at core strength, how it looks like, and then again, the trajectory of how it's going to play out as your child gets older. So again, looking for those connections and then collaborating. I think the work of teachers, if we collaborate in an authentic and meaningful way, just enhances kids' experiences. So, they don't think that PE is just a silo and I stay in the gym
sure.
and that's it. So looking at movement really in a holistic, concept-based way is really, I think, going to add more weight to its meaning.
Gosh, you just reminded me of, this is something at a former school that we would experiment with every once in a while. And it it didn't work for every single meeting, but every once in a while, it was a small team of us. And we said, let's go for a meeting, where we are walking.
Mm,
And again, we couldn't do it every single time, but when we were able to, how that different environment, it was almost like hitting the reset button. It didn't feel like, okay, we're just in the grind of the routine of this is the Thursday, this is the time we meet. And that little shift in our environment, it was really kind of like an awakening. And also it felt nice to be moving our bodies while we were
Mhm.
doing the work that needed to be done. And again, that's not like capital I innovation, but it did feel like innovation nonetheless.
Yeah, I think sometimes as adults we get in that grind when we're like meeting to meeting to meeting, and then all of a sudden I've got to the end of a day, and I'm like, I've sat a lot. I mean, as an educator, I'm not in this job to sit. I could never sit in a desk all day. That would just kill me. And even when I start like report writing time, I'm at a laptop for hours and I literally, it's really hard for me. And I just kind of think, okay, well, what's hard for kids then, and I just really want, I really want us to know ourselves and kids to know themselves and know what they need. But yeah, and I think, getting outside, connecting with in nature. I mean, after COVID, I think we really kind of just did a really connection around our mental health and what we need. And the whole glorification of busy. Let's just try to teach kids to slow down a bit and get off devices, because they're not going to necessarily, if I'm feeling sad, I'm going to get a device. It's a stimulant. It's not going to, help me settle and relax. And so there's all kinds of different, but we have to model that as parents too. It's so easy just to grab a device and pluck away so.
100%. I mean, we use our phones as distract ourselves. I think that it is what it is, and knowing and understanding that, I think, is so critical, and helping kids understand that at an early age. And you just made me think, this idea of physical spaces of teachers are on their feet, moving around all day. And then you go to a staff meeting in the library. And the last thing you want, it's my first time I get to sit all day. And you want me to sit in that hard little chair that's made for, a fourth grader. I don't really feel like that's my best choice right now. I'd like a beanbag chair. I want to be able to flop into a couch, at the end of those days. So it's amazing how much our surroundings and even choosing where and how we move in those spaces, I think is very critical. Inside that blog post, you share a great resource around just sensory tips for teachers, and we'll link to it in the show notes. It's a Google Doc menu that has all kinds of sensory tips for teachers. Can you walk us through maybe an example of one of those tips and how it plays out in the classroom?
Absolutely. I think, again, the article talks about sort of our states of alertness, our states of arousal, and, kind of sort of addressing whatever a child needs. So, for example, you'll have kids come in, they've come off the bus in the morning and they're just like, they're exhausted. So in that instance, you're going to want to kind of fire up their vestibular system. You want to fire up get them moving. And, lots of jumping, spinning, swinging. I mean, obviously in a classroom, this is going to have to be,
Sure.
adapted, but just thinking about, a moving in the morning. There's so much research around that early morning movement and how it sets kids up for the day. We've shifted to have our recess outside in the morning just to kind of give kids that fresh
Mm,
air um, and and also just thinking about, like, again, the opposite. If kids come in and they're super overstimulated, then you have to give that heavy work again. So crab crawls, animal walks, compression, like you talked about, that idea of those wall push-ups. You can do them even to your, pressing your hands together and pushing. So you can even do that, so you don't necessarily need equipment, pushing down into a chair. So there are some, like, ways that you can give yourself that heavy input, and in a way. And I always like to let parents and educators know this doesn't need to be for hours and hours. This is like a 1-2 minute thing, and then crab crawls, get your class to do a little circuit and then come back in, so that it can be something that's not going to be really impactful in terms of, like, I'm gonna but it's really still going to have that, help the kids settle down.
mm,
I'm wondering, Jody, if some of those strategies or some of those tips that you suggest, again, you were mentioning just the highly collaborative nature of early years. Do you see some of your colleagues also kind of leaning into some of those strategies? Because I'm thinking, also it's, we get dysregulated in all subject areas, right? At all different times of the day. So is it something that you've shared with peers, and they've also given you some feedback on how they're using it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my roles, I feel like, because is to work so closely with teachers in supporting kids with movement and movement needs. And movement needs meaning, they need movement. Movement needs meaning they're struggling with their fine and gross motor. So, for example, their shoulder girdle muscles are quite weak. I might notice that in PE, and they might have more attention to noticing their handwriting, or their, fine motor skills are
mm,
quite poor. So then we have that collaborative discussion. Oh, actually, I really noticed this child's having difficulty with their shoulder girdle. How is that manifesting in the classroom? And so again, those conversations then, I was even part of parent conferences this year with many teachers, and talking to parents and saying, this is how we're seeing your child, and this is how we're both going to work together to support them. So this is what I'm doing, and this is what she's doing. And
mm.
so parents are really, I think, quite grateful in terms of, like, wow, we see this, and this is how the next steps we're going to do, moving forward. So that's really how I love to work, because again, I don't necessarily think come to PE, do your thing and leave. When I'm there for teachers and supporting them, being part of student study meetings, being part of, discussions all the time about next steps for kids. It's so important. We had talked a lot about occupational therapy. And sometimes I think people are quite quick to go to occupational therapy, but there's a whole bunch of scaffolding that teachers can provide before they sort of reach that, grab for the OT intervention.
Sure, and I'm wondering, again, that sounds so powerful. Again, having multiple teachers in that conference with parents and caretakers explaining that. But Jody, of course, even when you were just mentioning like the crab walk and the animal walk, for parents and caretakers who maybe they hear you say that and they're like, I don't I don't
Yes.
know if I know what that means. How have some of those strategies been communicated or demonstrated even for parents and caretakers at your school?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I do a lot of parent education, even on my Seesaw posts. So, that's our, the way we communicate with our families. So instead of saying, oh, okay, we did X, Y, and Z this week, I might say that we're working on our core. So we're doing this, flying superhero, and this is something you can do at home, and we'll have a video of it. So I always I don't necessarily I share what we're doing, but I also want to share the underlying reason of why we're doing it, and then give
Mm.
family strategies as well. One of the things I always think, okay, what can I do next? What can I do next? And I really would like to create kind of a video logs, video diaries of these movements, so I can share with families, especially for families that don't necessarily have English as their primary language. So that, for me, I'm thinking, how can they access this information? We had, during our presentation yesterday, we actually had we have a quite high percentage of Korean families at our school. So we had our Korean liaison there, and she listened, and she didn't necessarily directly translate, but at the end she was there as a resource to talk to families and kind of talk them through some of the questions they might have. So it's always thinking, like, how can I provide this information not only to English speaking families, but like in an international setting, make it accessible for everyone. So yeah, visually translating however we can. I'm on board.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And what a brilliant use of Seesaw as well. So I know that many of our listeners will also be familiar with that. But I think just, what you mentioned about that idea of showing and explaining the why, because I'm sure that the superhero, the suspended superhero, like, sure, it's fun, but there also is and fun is important too, but there's also some other tangential reasons for doing that. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jody. And if you get that like visual library up, like I could see it. I know that Jeff has ideas too, like what a really great like Instagram series
Yeah,
or a TikTok
Yeah.
series. If you
especially
get
for parents,
right, if you get
you
that
know?
together, please do let us know, because like I could add to my library of animal and crab walks too.
Yeah, I
Different animal
know.
walks.
And it's the hard part, is that you always kind of, it, but that you also want to make sure you're being clear, and, the
Yeah.
parents are understanding,
Mhm.
it's not for 30 minutes. It's, for 10 meters, it is always like, how much do I want to overshare? Do I want to be, so it's always, I'm trying to tweak that, but yeah, that the video library is a goal. We'll see. Watch the space. We'll see.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Jody, for spending some time and sharing your wisdom with us. It's so great to have on, and really focused on, you focused a lot on early years, but of course this goes through, all grade levels, which I love. I think that's a huge part of it. If people want to learn more about you, or want to follow you, or want to reach out, where's the best place for them to be able to do that?
I mean, I have my website, but I definitely, that's more aspirational in terms of my blog posts. Right now, I think Twitter is my first, I'm building in terms of, my connections with, my personal learning network. And it's been great. And I'm really, really so happy to be able to just connect with, especially early years professionals, and talk shop. And gosh, I can talk education forever, but yeah, so Twitter is probably the best way to connect.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that link is in the show notes as well. Trisha, how about you? If people want to hear more about a lot of the frameworks that you're making around self-advocacy, both in the physical education classroom and other classrooms, what's the best way for people to follow you and get those resources?
Well, by the time this episode airs, we will, of course, be looking at launching new free guides for 2023. And I love when people reach out and let us know what they need. So actually, if you check out shiftingschools.com, the free guides, I'm going to go really old school and say, send me an email. Let's have a longer conversation. You can email me at Tricia, TRICIA, at shiftingschools.com. Let me know if there's something that you have liked from our free resource library and you want more of it. Let me know if there's something you didn't like and you want us to avoid doing that again. Or again, if you're looking for support in a completely new path of inquiry, if Jeff and I can support you, that's what Shifting Schools is here for. And what about you, Jeff? What's your communication preferred methodology for folks that want to connect with you?
Well, you can find me everywhere on the internet at JUTech. So you can always do that. Or my email is jeff@shiftingschools.com. But I also, for those of you in 2023 that might be jumping Twitter, because we know this is all the rage right now, I am now over on Mastodon, same place, at JUTech. So you can follow me over there. starting to get a following over there. There's a great education server, mastodon.education, if you're looking for a place to get started outside of Twitter. A great community focused on education over there. You kind of get rid of all the stuff and just get to talk ed tech. So some good stuff going on over there as well. So you can find me over there as well. We'll make sure all those links are in the show notes. Jody, thank you for staying up late. I know it's 9 p.m. in Germany, so appreciate you putting in the long hours today. And the thing I love, though, Trisha, is every time we get to talk to educators, the passion, the true passion that comes through. Like, you can get an educator at 3 a.m. and their passion of just teaching comes through. I love it. Jody, thank you so much for bringing that today. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you so much.
blogging and being on Twitter. And we'll make sure that we have all that in the show notes for people.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. I really, really love talking with you guys. Thank you so much.